about equality and particularly the glaring inequality in our country, and we'll hear more about that. And it's about what fathers need. It's about the support that fathers and mothers and our families need. So those are the three headlines that we hope you walk out of here with, and I'll talk a little bit about each one of those. Next, please. First, on the time use. Men are doing more than ever before in the U.S. We are spending more time on a daily basis caring for children than ever before. We identify ourselves more as caregivers. The new normal is households that are both caregivers and breadwinners, that we have these roles interchangeably, but we haven't quite caught up. There's the increase you can see in terms of what men have told us of the daily time they spend caring for their children over the last 30 years. So part of the time we're kind of almost inclined to say, so we've achieved something close to equality. Well, not so much. Next week. Women with children under the age of 6, we've got a couple of babies in the room. We know the amount of care that this requires on a daily basis. Women spend an average of 66 minutes providing physical hands-on care to children, while men are spending about 26 minutes. Now, that number tells us two things. One, it tells us what a small amount of time that we're allowing any parent to have in caring for small children. That is not enough time for any of us. And it also tells us that while fathers have increased a huge amount, when it comes to the daily hands-on care, we're still doing only about half of it. One of the things that we know in terms of what this means as a daily stress for parents is that women have told us 30 years back, when they were both earners and caregivers, is about 40% of them experience work stress. 30 years later, that number is about the same. This has been a chronic condition of working women's lives. Men have almost doubled their sense of stress, and now report more than 60% of men in dual earner couples are reporting stress. That is, men's reports of work-life stress are now higher than women's. Now, women, when we share this number, will often say, well, yeah, get on with it. We've experienced this forever. Once you get used to it, this is just the new daily life. But it does tell us just the rigidity that's there of families wanting them to do more of this, women themselves and mothers wanting them to do more of this, but how unsupportive still our workplaces are to allow our families to provide the daily care that we need. The next issue is inequality. We think you can call it a tale of two fatherhoods, and that's a point that we bring up in the report as well. We've got the Mark Zuckerbergs, coming out very visibly, taking leave, some of the biggest corporations providing leadership on this topic, saying, we need men to do more, we can take leave, and we continue to have meaningful careers. We're not slackers because we take leave. Really important to have that. And then we have the poorest families in our countries. We have the largest number ever of non-resident fathers. The number goes from 8 to 10 million of the estimates that we have, of fathers who do not live with their children. Ron's going to share some more data on who these fathers are, but what we know about them first and foremost is that they are the poorest men in our country. And we know that we spend about $5 billion a year on state-level funding that is used for child support enforcement. On the one hand, of course, we need fathers to provide financially. But in that zeal to hold the lowest income men accountable for paying child support, we forget too often what they mean in the daily lives of their children in terms of caring. And mothers are telling us increasingly that we value his time as much or more than we value the funding that he's providing. We also know that the vast majority, 3/4 of those who are in arrears with child support payments, are fathers who make less than $20,000 a year. So it's time to press and update that refresh button on the screen that my 18-year-old daughter likes to remind me about, that our punitive measures around the so-called deadbeat dads no longer make any sense if they ever did. This number is most glaring if we look at the next one, please. The number of children who don't have contact with their fathers because their fathers are in prison. 3.7 million children in the U.S. have an incarcerated parent. 92% of those are fathers. We could guess, although we don't have clear numbers, that it looks like something like 1 out of 5 of those non-resident fathers is not with the child because they're in prison. And if there's anything that pushes us to reconsider, rethink our mass incarceration policies, to think about what's going on in the daily lives and the impact of these policies on children. Next, please. Third and last, and Vicki's going to talk more about this, and David, we want to hold up again championing this is the issue of saying we need leave. We need paid leave. The moment is now. We applaud the things that are happening at the city level, at the state level, the things that corporations are doing on their own, but it's time to get to a nationally mandated leave. Countries around the world that are offering this, and I think you know that shameful statistic that among the 22 countries that are part of the OECD, which are really the wealthiest countries in the world, highest per capita income, the U.S. ranks number one in only one thing, and that is that we don't offer paid leave. We rank pretty much at the bottom of all the other indicators in terms of support for families and gender equality policies that would make it possible for men and women to do leave and care at the same time. We know that corporations in the U.S. are pushing back, a lot of employers are pushing back, saying we can't afford it. The countries that have offered this consistently are not going under economically. In fact, they have the lowest unemployment rates in the world. And in fact, if we look at the cost of this, it costs about a 1% payroll tax to offer this at a high benefit rate. So what are we learning from it? Families want it. There is no political party in most of the countries that have been offering it for a number of years that would even think of rolling it back because they know they would lose. I've heard there's elections coming up, there's some noise going on about these things. Candidates at all levels who think this is a good thing are probably going to do well. I think you will tell us much more about that. The point being, the support that we need, one of the things that's really clear in the report is it's time to question this notion that the individual family can figure it out on their own, or that the individual employer can do this on their own, and to say we need nationally mandated policies that support that. This is only one of the things that we need, but we think this issue is what we're after. Really unleashing what this means for our children, for our families, and might I add that men also find this to be one of our most meaningful relationships in the world. We are healthier, happier, less likely to be violent, less likely to be imprisoned if we report these close relationships with our children. Thanks very much. I now have the pleasure of inviting Ron and his team. Ron Mincy is a professor of social policy and social work practice at Columbia University. And I think it's fair to say the leading researcher on non-resident fathers in the U.S. Thrilled that he and his team shared data with the report, and thrilled that he could come from a policy event on this issue in the UK to join us here. Ron, thank you very much.
Also, I'd like to thank you for attending this morning and for Gary to engaging in this. I will also say that we all have a story. Today is my 64th birthday, and my thrill this morning was to have my granddaughter call me and say, "Hi, Granddad, happy birthday." So this is we do what we do. So I want to touch on just several issues briefly. The first is that we are in a place, currently, go to the first slide, where the inequality issue that touches and relates to the issue of fatherhood is really undergirded by what's happening in our economy. So since 1979, this chart shows the cumulative changes in the wage rates of men at various places in the income distribution. And the thing that I want to point out to you is that the red line in the middle, note where zero is. The average hourly earnings of men have not budged since 1979 for those who are at the 50th percentile or below. That's basically half of all men in the United States haven't seen a wage increase since I graduated from high school. And what's important here is that you look at the zero. This is true for the 50th percentile, the 40th percentile, the 20th percentile. And the lower one's earnings are in the United States, the more likely we are to become fathers. And so part of the fatherhood challenge in the United States has to do with the fact that men are not seeing their earnings rise relative to their fathers, but in fact they're seeing exactly the opposite. Their earnings are either stagnant or falling over the period in which they're likely to become fathers. And this is especially true for men who have not had a 4-year college education. So with that, this is in part responsible for the decline in marriage rates. In part. So 51% of all children born to women under 30 in the United States are born to women who are unmarried. And that does not mean that there are not relationships between moms and dads. We know that non-marital this phenomenon of non-resident fathers and what we call in the policy world custodial mothers is an increasingly generic phenomenon in the United States, especially for men who don't have a 4-year college degree. And so when we think about fatherhood, we need to think and celebrate and worry about what's happening with non-resident fathers as well. What we also know is that by the time their children are 5 years old, first of all, many non-resident fathers are romantically involved with the mothers of their children. They're just not living together. This is especially the case among African American non-resident fathers. Latino non-resident fathers tend to cohabit with the mothers of their children for quite a long time, and white non-resident fathers or white unmarried fathers tend to cohabit at the birth of their children. When those relationships break up, then they become non-resident. So there's quite a bit of complexity and diversity in this non-resident father phenomenon. However, we know that by the time the children are 5 years old, half of all non-resident fathers have some contact with their children, and it really looks like a pie chart. Some of them see their kids about twice a week, once a month, and so the frequency of contact among non-resident fathers is much higher than prior data would ever lead us to believe. And we know that non-resident fathers are engaged in reading to their children, in playing with their children, in telling stories to their children, and those things are critical to the cognitive development of children when they're in their first 3 years, which is important for their academic achievement later on. So please go to the next slide. The downside of a lot of this is money. And so much of our policies in relation to fatherhood focus on how much money non-resident fathers are earning. But because of the economic trends that we've been in, it's really difficult for most non-resident fathers to pay all the child support that they're due. This rather complicated chart has a very simple message. On the bottom, this is a simulation based upon men, non-resident fathers who earn $20,000, $30,000, and $40,000 a year. If they earn $20,000 a year and pay all the child support they are expected to pay after paying their full child support and their usual expenses, if they have 2 children, they are $8,000 below the poverty line for a single-person family. If they have 1 child, they are $6,000 below the poverty line for a single-person family. If their income rises to $20,000 for 2 children, they're nearly $4,000 below the poverty line, again, after paying full child support and their usual expenses. The only men who manage to achieve, to have an income level above the poverty line are men who make $40,000 a year, which is close to the median income for men in the United States, and who have 1 child. And so, in order to make your full child support obligations plus your usual expenses, you have to earn nearly the median income in the United States. And this is not happening for lots of non-resident fathers in the United States. And therefore, when they fail to make their child support payments when they're in the formal child support enforcement system, it compromises their ability to have contact with their children, to visit their children, and so these things are tied together. So we really need to do something radically different in terms of the way in which we're thinking about enforcing child support, particularly the levels at which we set child support payment. And this is one of the things that the Obama administration has been proposing in the rule changes that are now within the administration, and hopefully will be implemented shortly. So let me go on to talk about then resident fathers. Please go to the next slide. These challenges that we experience with respect to men's earnings are not only have consequences for non-resident fathers, but they also have consequences for resident fathers as well. And you saw in the film that many fathers are working very long hours, and they're also working what we call non-standard hours, and as a consequence of it, have very little opportunity to interact with their children. I think about this importantly because when I had my first children, my youngest son is now 40 years old. I probably got that wrong. But my wife put me through graduate school, and I was the primary caregiver. And I remember the experience of sort of riding Lon Jr. on my thigh, feeling his heartbeat against my thigh, and what that meant, and the bonding that they created between him and me, that is, lifelong. And so, the ability of men to have ongoing contact with their children is critical in terms of the ability of children to attach, the ability of children to feel secure, and then the ability ability of children then to learn from fathers. My colleague, Natasha Cabrera, has done some research on the impact of father engagement on child well-being, and it turns out that because men tend to use normal language in talking to and speaking to children, children in their interactions with men, they develop more complex vocabulary. It improves their cognitive development over time. This is very, very important, but because of the work schedules of many resident fathers, they really don't have enough time to interact with their children. So, for example, if you look at, these are resident fathers who are resident with their children, and we divided these up into fathers who are in dual-earner families and single-earner families, and we're thinking about how many of these fathers are working either on the weekend sometime, or before 6 a.m. in the morning, or after 6 p.m. at night. They may be doing this alone. Both mom and dad may be working these non-standard hours, or the dad may be working these non-standard alone. And so, if you sum up the number of resident fathers who are working non-standard hours, sometimes with a partner, sometimes by themselves, it turns out that when children are 1 year old in the Fragile Families and Child Wellbeing Survey, 58% of fathers who are resident are working non-standard hours. And by the time these children, go to the next slide, are 5 years old, by the time these children are 9 years old, so they're in 4th grade, they're at the period in which children have to sort of use their reading skills in order to learn other skills, fully 62% of them are working non-standard hours. And some of them, 30% of them, both the mother and father are working non-standard hours. And therefore, I want to take you back to these wage trends with which I began. The fact that the average hourly earnings of men without college degrees haven't budged in 40 years means that men who earn more are doing so by working longer hours. They're not only working longer hours, but they're working non-standard hours. And that may be a good thing from their vantage point of sort of putting food on the table, but it is a really, really bad thing in terms of their ability to interact with their children, to share child caring activities. And therefore, we really have to think about a number of strategies, including increasing the minimum wage, increasing their earned income tax credit, and raising the earned income tax credit higher in the earnings distribution so that men will have higher wage rates, won't have to work so long in order to support their families, and can really interact with their children and be involved in caregiving. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ron and Gary. We're going to open it up to questions in just a few minutes, but I want to pick back up on something Gary was talking about, which is paid leave, and then also circle back to some of this incredible data that Ron has presented and talk just for a minute about the other policy solutions that are out there. But just very quickly to put some data behind what Gary was talking about with respect to paid leave. So the U.S. is an outlier with respect to the rest of the world, and this is a trend. This is the inequality thing that Gary was talking about. It runs through all of this. So the U.S. is the only developed country, one of only a handful of countries in the entire world that doesn't provide paid maternity leave. We're one of a handful in the highly developed world that doesn't provide paid paternity or parental leave. We're actually also one of two that doesn't provide paid sick leave. And so we've been talking a lot about the early years, but kids have needs as they grow. The need to get to the doctor, the need to be able to go to the hospital if they fall off the jungle gym. And all of these things really relate to parental attachment, relate to child well-being. There's also a huge chasm here between high-wage and low-wage workers. So overall in the U.S., just 13% of workers have access to paid family leave. 13%. So that means 87% don't. Among the lowest wage workers, 95% do not have access to paid family leave. Whereas for higher wage families, it's still pretty terrible. For high wage workers, 80% don't have access to paid family leave. But if you think about it a different way, the folks who are financial and business managers, thousands of dollars in lost earnings a year, and that creates sort of gender inequities that persist in caregiving. So I will wrap it up there and turn it over to the audience for time for question and answer for these fabulous panelists. Yes?
I have a question about the slide on income. And is that a gross income figure or a net income figure? When you talk about the income of the care of the father.
So those were father's earnings. And they were their gross earnings. And so, yeah, these are really staggering results when you think about it. Really compromising both the ability of men who want to get married, who want to remain with their partners, as well as compromising the ability of men who are no longer with their partners.
Yes.
So there's been a lot of talk on both sides of the aisle about where a minimum wage should be set at. Different municipalities across the country are setting them in different, a lot of them are going 15, some of them are going smaller. Sort of where do you see a good minimum wage number, and how do you see the difference between 12 and 15 impacting fathers and mothers' ability to spend more time with their children?
So, in some of the figures I showed, remember that the wages have been stagnant even at the 50th percentile. And these men at the 50th percentile are making about $18 an hour. And so, the minimum wage conversations that we are currently having will never get up into that level. Again, I was at a conference in London this weekend, and in Ireland they're talking about again raising the minimum wage so that it hits the wage rates of men beyond upwards of 20th percentile. So I think in the U.S. To raise the minimum wage that high, given this historical trend, is sort of politically infeasible. On the other hand, there is the earned income tax credit, and that is a way by expanding the earned income tax credit to get higher sort of after-tax wages to men in the 40th, 50th percentile. If we expanded the credit, some states are doing it by having a supplemental EITC at the state level. And the other thing I think we need to really consider is to have a childless EITC, because many childless workers are in fact non-resident fathers. But they earn about their benefit from their income tax credit is about $500, which is like only a tenth of what, or less than a tenth of what a mother with 2 children gets from the EITC. And so I think the action really is an expansion of your income tax credit rather than increases in the minimum wage, because they won't get up to living wage.
Yes. Actually, folks today identify themselves. I should have said that before. Sorry.
Sure. I'm Holly, fellow start using the keys against, the father. What can you do, or is there any kind of program that can be implemented, whereby when love breaks down, then the two parties can get together, and so much concern about the future of their children instead of one person saying, oh, you broke my heart, we're no longer together, and therefore we'll not be able to have access to the children.
So, one of the things that the Obama administration's budget does this year is that it proposes that men who have non-resident fathers who have a child support order and are in compliance with that order also have access to parenting time on the same basis that a divorced parent father has access to parenting time. So one of the big inequities in the United States is usually when a couple divorces, two things happen. There's a child support order and there's also a visitation order. And so his right to have contact with the child is married to his obligation to provide child support. In most states, that is not the case for non-resident fathers. So that, again, the more non-resident fathers we have, 8 to 10 million, when they have a child support obligation that they are paying, it does not mean that they have a visitation, a right to visit their children. And so one of the mechanisms that would push that along is if they had access to parenting time, as this budget proposes. I think the second thing that we can do, though, is in the development of responsible fatherhood programs, there are increasingly discussions about co-parenting. To move the conversation about serving fathers and children to serving mothers, fathers, and children, so that when the love is gone, as it were, to help parents understand we still have a stake in the well-being of this child. How can we work out our drama such that we can continue to promote child well-being and work together? And there are several of these going on, one in Baltimore and some in other places around the country.
I think we have time for one more question. Yes.
Hi, I'm Dakota Strode, representative of Hood's office. I was wondering if any of your research was inclusive of the LGBTQA plus community, and if you see any advances for that research in the future.
We do include the issue of, one, thinking about legal policies that apply to all family relationships and connections. And we do include data on adoptive parents and in terms of gay couples. And the data is quite clear. One of the things that we think is also important and a useful kind of lesson for all of us is as we looked at the data on kinds of couples who have achieved more equality at the household level in terms of caregiving, gay couples have the most balanced relationship of who does the daily caregiving of children. So there's one, we look at what gay families need to be able to support their children, but we also looked at from the point of view of heterosexual couples, we need to look at this is what equality can look like. So yes, we do talk about that in the report.
Well, thank you for the fantastic questions. Now I'm going to turn it over to Mark Rico from Senator Murphy's staff. Senator Murphy, like the rest of us, we're had some traffic delays and difficulties this morning. But more than that, I want to say, folks may have seen that Senator Murphy was very busy last night on the Senate floor, and on a personal note, I also know that Senator Murphy is an incredibly engaged dad because his son and my son actually go to the same school. And I have seen him there walking his son to school and holding his hand. And just a couple of weeks ago, his son's class was up, and there's an assembly every morning, and his son's class was up kind of doing their little presentation, and he was right there with his iPhone like every other parent. And it means a lot to me as a citizen of this country to have representatives who are walking the walk and talking the talk and doing the right thing. And there is perhaps no greater sort of person in this chamber that sort of, well, there are many great people in this chamber, but he's the one that I know best in terms of the engagement that he has in his kids' lives. And to have sort of the old-fashioned senator who actually lives in a neighborhood here in D.C. and sends their kids to public school, I think is a real testament to his own values. So, Mark, why don't I turn
Thanks. So what do we conclude and what do we suggest needs to be part of some policy recommendations? One is that we've got to get our school curriculum and all the things that we do to raise our children that acknowledge the new reality of what is the new normal. We will very likely all be caregivers and breadwinners. We talk a lot about the need to bring our girls to work, our daughters to work, and particularly to engage them in non-traditional places and areas of work. We're not doing nearly enough of that to say, what do we need our sons to know about becoming these kinds of hands-on caregivers when they grow up? So what do we need to do in terms of educational policies, engaging both teachers and then all of us as parents, planting the seeds that both our sons and daughters need to be prepared for a world in which they'll likely be 50% caregivers and 50% breadwinners. Next one. We see very much these issues tied to the other kinds of services that we offer. Sexuality education, engaging men as part of family planning. We know that one key driver in terms of how much men will participate later on with their children if they were involved in the decision to have the conception in the first place. We cannot separate these things. They must go together. We can't expect later on to hold men accountable if we're not engaging them in the earliest conversations about what it means to plan our reproduction. Third, leave we've talked about. More than high time, low cost, we can provide this. We need to get past this notion while we applaud all the corporations and employers that are offering it. The fairness requires that we offer this as a national policy. It's got to be non-transferable between mothers and fathers. We want all to have it. Families of all orientations, those who provide other kinds of caregiving, it's got to include sick leave as well. It's high time to put this out there, and we're thrilled to support the Family Act as well, while we nudge as well states and cities to move ahead on this. Fourth, we need supportive workplaces. Even after you make paid leave happen, we know that many men and women feel like if they took it, they would be penalized at the workplace. We've got to change workplace culture. We need other kinds of flexible work-life possibilities that allow us to take the time off when we need it. Fifth, we need to engage men in this as a profession. There's been tremendous advances of women into the so-called STEM professions. In fact, if you look at charts that look from the early 90s up until now, they all show spikes of women entry. We've not achieved equality in those, but we've made some tremendous strides. If you look at men's participation in the caregiving professions, it looks fairly pathetic, to call it that. 2% of kindergarten teachers and daycare workers are men. That number is unchanged over the last 30 years. Some professions, social workers, dear to my heart, it's what my father is, it's actually the percentage has gone from about 35% to actually now less than 20%. We continue to pass this notion that real work is anything but caregiving. We've got to also change that norm by saying we need women in the STEM professions, we need men and boys to look at the heal professions and find something in the middle that says equality means I can choose and all these professions are equally valid and equally well paid. It is time to kind of rethink how we deal with custody, and I think that one of our colleagues had a question about that. How do we end the tension around this? For too often that debate has been taken over by either angry fathers groups or other times taken over by lawyers who are trying to make it a litigious, too often a conflictual situation. Sorry to the lawyers in the room. But let's acknowledge that the best interest of the child needs to be the overall point here, and whoever the fit parent is, we should move toward a presumption of joint custody. It's time to sort of put the angriest voices at that and say, really, we've got to focus on what is best for the child. The last one. Certainly we need to talk about all the kinds of policies that Ron was mentioning, whether it's a living wage, the earned income tax credit, other policies that say we care about whether you're involved in your child's life regardless of residence status. We know what needs to be done. We've been very slow in doing it. We've got the policies that are there. We know what to move on. And the last one would be, I think Ron pointed out that there's a lot of holes in our literature. A lot of the child development literature, a lot of the work-life literature talks about women, talks about mothers. We've got to stop looking at fathers as being, we still too often in the child development literature see fathers as kind of deficit mothers. We've got to look at fathers in their own right as caregivers together with mothers. We know that in these halls, data makes a big difference. And as we said in the world, when we did the review of fathers worldwide, what we don't count doesn't count. So if we're not counting fathers and their participation, we're not measuring it, we're not assessing it, we're not making it part of our policy. And that's the point that Some of us will stick around. Please take the report with you, tweet it, retweet it, make some noise with it, and thanks